Welcome back, and today we are here with another video lecture of CIA Part 2 Unit 5, which is about engagement planning. This is a brief introduction about myself, my qualification and my experience. As usual, if you are interested and you have joined for the first time, you can pause this slide and you can pause this video and you can read it yourself. This is an important slide in which you can gauge your progress. For now, we have covered up from Unit 1 to Unit 4, and today we will be discussing about Unit 5, which is about engagement planning. I'm using, just for your information, I'm using Glimpse study material. The reason why, because I personally use the same material for passing the exam, and I personally feel that it is more concise and to the point, though I wouldn't be recommending to anyone who doesn't have much of knowledge of internal audit or who is not so much familiar, because the book in itself, I feel it's more of an abstract than a detailed discussion on each point internal audit concepts. However, what I'm trying to do to compensate that, recording these videos so you can better have an understanding, even if you're using GLIM for the first time and you do not have the internal audit background, you can still benefit from these videos, because I'm trying to explain it from the very basics to advanced level, and with the perspective or with the vision that anyone, whether they have internal audit background or they do not have the internal audit background, they should be able to grasp this concept. So accordingly, there are 9 units in the CIA Part 2 exam, as per the GLIM publication. However, whichever publisher you use, whether Hawk or any other, the concept remains the same, so it doesn't make a big difference whichever publishers you are using. The entire exam is of 100 marks, and here I've just given you an approximation that from which unit how many MCQs might come in the exam. There's no hard and fast rule. They might increase a few MCQs in each section, but this is just a general idea. And it also tells you that you cannot skip any of the unit, so it is very vital for you to grasp the entire syllabus. So far we have discussed about the internal audit operations, assurance and compliance engagement, detail about financial, environmental, and consulting engagements, and then from 4 till, I would say, till 9, this is a pack of units which falls under audit cycle. So here you will find that each unit complements the other unit, and you can take it as a step 1 and then step 2 another unit. So internal audit planning, it's about the overall internal audit planning. Today we will be discussing about engagement planning, that how we can plan for one particular engagement, and then we have a section for information gathering, which is part of the audit execution. Sampling and statistical control, again part of the audit execution. Analysis, evaluation, and documentation and supervision, again part of the audit execution. And the last one is about reporting, where you come up with the final audit report, and you progress the monitor by looking at the audit findings, whether the management has implemented those controls or not. We call it, generally in audit terms, we call it follow-up. So this is the overall snapshot of the entire syllabus. We have covered around 20% in the previous videos, and today we will be covering from engagement planning approximately 20%. So by the end of today's lecture, we would have covered somewhere around 40% of the entire syllabus. This is a brief mind map for those who are visual learners. So what we will be covering in this entire unit, that is which is reflected here. We will be discussing about engagement planning, then we will be discussing about the objective and scope of any audit engagement, how we manage our internal audit resources. Then the fourth section will be about audit procedures, and there is one missing, but which is about the overall audit program. Then after this all, we come up with an audit program. So this is the holistic view of the entire syllabus. If you remember in the last video, we discussed about internal audit plan. So generally what happened, just to have a quick overview and to link the previous unit with this one, generally what happens that we, as an internal auditor, we plan our internal audit engagements throughout the year, and that we carry out based on audit universe, that how many areas that we can audit, out of how many areas we can, which areas we can audit. So the overall scope of the company and all the areas within the company that can be audited is audit universe. And then we see, based on the risk assessment, that which are the areas that we can plan for this year. And based on that, we present that to audit committee, and audit committee eventually approve the internal audit plan. So in the internal audit plan, let's say you have 6 engagement, 6 audit assignments. Generally it takes 2 months to complete one audit engagement depending on the scope area, but let's presume that there are 6 audit engagements throughout the year, and you have an audit staff of 2-3 people, and you want to complete the annual audit plan. So how you will embark on the journey of taking each audit project from initiation to execution to final reporting, that is what we will be covering in this unit. Not the detailed level of execution, but the planning of that each project. So that each project is generally called as engagement plan. So we will be discussing about that in this entire unit. So internal engagement plan could be any audit project. It could be an internal audit project. Internal audit, as you aware, that we perform 2 types of engagements: either assurance engagements, which is more of audit, and consulting engagement, which is more of advisory services. So be it audit, be it consulting, but engagement for the purpose of internal audit engagement could be any of one. It could be it could be a single task that we perform a specific audit on a scope area, or it could be the multiple tasks or multiple activities that we perform in order to achieve a single objective for that specific scope area. Some of the example is any internal audit assignments, maybe procurement, finance, HR, these kind of audit. Control self-assessment, where we give and we enable the management to come up and identify the weaknesses and brainstorm and come with the recommended action plan, so we can be that kind of a facilitator. That assignment itself could be known as engagement. Then we can be assigned a specific fraud related investigations, that could be a possibility, or any other consultancy assignment for that sake. We can prepare a planning memo. Generally, a planning memo is a document which we keep as part of our internal audit working papers, which may comprises of the objective of the engagement, what is the scope area, how you perform the risk assessment, how you prioritize areas based on the risk assessment, which areas you will be testing, and eventually that all your workings needs to be on the audit work program, and all the workings needs to be approved by the engagement lead in order to ensure that the quality of your work performed. So this is some basics regarding the engagement planning. There are certain standards requirements, so that the standard give you a bare minimum criteria based on which you can ensure that you are in compliance with the IPPF, but they will not go in detail level of telling you each and every point. So bare minimum, these are key elements that need to be part of your audit program. First of all, the engagement plan needs to be documented. It needs to have an objective, scope, timing, and resources. Resources means that how many auditors will be performing that engagement. If there is a need for a travel, do they have a travel budget? Will they have the necessary tools and information and access to the information? So this is all part of the resources. Then you have to consider the overall organizational objectives and strategies, because you want to align your audit project engagement with the overall organizational objectives. And the reason being, we want to be more effective while using our limited resources and add value to the organization. So overall, whichever activity or whichever engagement we perform, we always have to ensure that we should be aware of the overall, the bigger picture, where we should know that how we are playing our part through our internal audit activities in letting the organization achieve its objective. Some more requirements related to an activity is that we have to understand the activity level strategy and objectives, which means, for example, if you are reviewing an procurement activity, for example, how the requisition is made, who approve the procurement of any particular item, how the vendor is selected, how the purchasing process initiated in the system, how the controls are, who has the authority to approve, will we be going through an approved list of supplier, or if it is one of, will we be going directly and procuring or having a new quote in order to assess that who is better supplier. Is it an urgent or is it a routine product? Again, how much quantity do we have already an agreement with any particular company? How the process of initiating the purchase order will happen, how the material will be received, who will acknowledge, how the payments will be made. So this is all an activity level objective, but we have to understand that what is the objective of each any particular activity within the whole process. So it is very important to understand always the bigger picture. If you are an auditor who has an eagle eye to the details but without losing focus from the overall bigger picture, then trust me that you will be one of the most successful internal auditor. We have to ensure that what are the key risks in different kind of activities, because then only we will be able to assess the control associated with those risks and whether these controls are functioning effectively in order to manage the risk. Just in case of procurement, for example, what if we select a wrong supplier? What if we order excessive or less quantity? What if we receive a bad quality item? What if we pay more for the item than the market price? So these are all risks, and then accordingly we match those risks. What are the key controls within the system, within the process that the management has deployed in order to manage those risks? Again, the adequacy and effective of any activities in regards to governance, risk, and control process. This is something which we have to ascertain, and the opportunity to improve. We as an internal auditor, we are not only focused on identifying loopholes or weaknesses, but we also want to ensure that the process is smooth, efficient, and without spending too much cost on controls. We are able to balance the cost benefit and achieve more results from that particular process. So it is not the job of internal auditor to cumbersome the entire process through hundreds of controls, because then the overall efficiency and effectiveness will be defeated, or we will not be able to reap the benefit of the process. So we have to strike a balance where we look into it that our recommendation is in a way that add value to the organization, and where we manage the risk within the risk appetite. This is the overall objective. Some more elements that need to be taken into account from the standard perspective: understanding the entity strategy and objectives, as we have already discussed, understanding the risk associated with the achievement of the strategy. Internal auditors should understand the significance of change. This is very important. So whenever you are planning an audit engagement, or if there is a specific project that you are associated with, look at for the areas that has recently been changed. Maybe there was a new system that the department has deployed. Maybe there were hierarchical changes within the department. Maybe it's a new department. Maybe the legislation or the laws within the country has put certain criteria or requirements within the department. As a result, that the department has to change certain processes. Because any change within happen that process, there is a need that the internal auditor give an assurance that after the change, the things are or the controls are managing, the management are managing the risk. So this is important that you look for the change, any significant change that happen. Overall, at the annual internal audit planning process, also you look at this specific element, but at the engagement level, again, you look for this thing: what are the resources, what are the key skill sets that we needed, do we have, we don't have, we have to outsource. So this is also part of our responsibility that we should ascertain. The documents which we will be needing, and the retention of the document, confidentiality of the document, this is all part of auditor responsibility to ensure. Logistical concerns: maybe we want to visit the site, we have to carry out some inspections, maybe we have to travel to another part, maybe there are certain approvals that we have to get it before even having a site visit. So this is all needs to be taken care of, or at least have to be considered while doing an engagement planning. Forms of final results communication: so how we will be presenting our final results, audit report, presentation, what will be our recommendation. So this is all we need to have, we need to ascertain while planning an audit engagement. Whenever we are carrying out an audit engagement, there are certain procedures, we call it audit procedures, that we perform. We perform these procedures at two levels: at the preliminary audit stage level, and then while doing the audit engagement. At the preliminary audit phase, it is very important that we carry out certain high level audit procedure, just to be more sure about that what we are doing is in the right direction. So you can use these audit procedures for any of the stages. So what are these procedures? Preliminary surveys: we carry out certain kind of surveys just to assess the control environment within their department, to assess do they have any policies and procedure, criteria, standards which they have to achieve, is there is a defined role and responsibility within the department. So where we need a standard set of information, yes, no, or specific rating, we can perform a preliminary survey just to assess the control environment within that area of scope. We can perform again preliminary or the survey in the post execution as well of audit engagement. Analytical procedure is very important, where we can identify what is the cost, what is the departmental or that area cost, how much is their budget, where does their budget stands within the overall organization budget, how much it is in terms of percentage, and what are the key performance indicator in terms of achieving certain sales target or certain cost reduction target. So these are all the analytical procedures that we can perform just to get certain ratios and see whether the cost which is happening within the company, or the targets which they are being asked to achieve is within the limits. So variance analysis we can perform. So analytical procedure is a very good steps that we can perform just to get a very at a very early stage a snapshot or check on if there is any abnormal numbers that we have to further investigate post execution. Questionnaires, we can develop a questionnaire where we can reach out to different individuals for certain kind of answers. Questionnaires are good in a formal organization where, or in a place where the candidates are very dispersed and we do not have time to reach out to every individual to carry out interviews. So we can send them a questionnaire, and then they can respond. Organization which are more collaborative, which are small in team, interview might be the most better option, or we can have a subsequent interviewing with after after getting the results of questionnaire. Again, interview when we said so one to with the other people to understand the process, to understand the risk, to understand the control environment. Observation is where we look at people how they are working. There is no best way than observing your surrounding. One of the example I would say that one time I visited to a glass manufacturing factory where there are a lot of furnace and heat within that environment. Now I found there were certain workers who were not wearing safety gloves or not wearing a proper helmet. So, and it's very risky because there the temperature is very high and there is molten glass, furnace, heat. So I come across these audit findings just by observing the environment. Sometimes you can look at and see obsolete item, damaged items, bad quality items. So this is all part of observation. Prior audit reports is one of the good tool that you can use just to assess at the very start what was the results when previously this area was audited, what were the risks, how the auditor concluded their report based on their opinion that whether this area was having good control environment or bad control environment, if that area has previously been audited. It could be internal audit, it could be a third party audit, it could be a quality assurance audit, it could be a regulatory audit, it could be any type of audit or review that you can obtain in order to assess the control environment within that particular scope area. Process mapping is one of the very good tool that we can deploy, by which while understanding the process we just see that how information flows, how documents are being generated at each step level, what are the key controls that is being performed. So we can simply write it down, we can depict in a Visio all the process. There is a detailed level of my lecture in unit 1, but I'm not so sure in which chapter, but where I have given or showed you that how to document a process and what are the key symbols and what are the key types of way by which you can document a process. But generally speaking, if you are not so savvy with how to formally document a process, you can simply chart out a rough sketch of the entire process and see and perform a walkthrough that no activity is being missed out, and what are the key documents that is being generated at each step, and what are the key controls associated with that each step in terms of review, in terms of approval, in terms of password protection, in terms of timelines, delays, resources, so that you can perform. And lastly, checklist is an amazing approach where we wherever we feel that there are certain repetitive tasks that we can perform, we just conclude the entire list of areas that we have, or list of activities that we have to perform, and just not to miss out on any, so that we can also use in our preliminary or in post execution our audit engagements. Some of the important elements which has been re-emphasized in this unit is about risk identification. It is very vital for internal auditor to understand the business, to understand the objectives of the business, the strategy, the long-term plan, the short-term plan, and see what are the key risks and what are the key controls within that high-level understanding. To identify the risk, we can carry out a brainstorming session within the team or with the management. We can look at different reports. If we can benchmark that process with any other previous audited process, or based on our experience, if we have audited any that particular area in any other company. We can use for that purpose a risk control matrix, RCM it is called, in which there is nothing but an activity level, what are the key risks associated with that activity, what are the key proposed or idle controls should be, and then we look at what are the controls that the management have, and then we perform the substantive testing in order to ensure that these controls are working effectively. Risk assessment we can perform at the very preliminary stage, where we are trying to understand the overall process, and then after the preliminary process, when we start executing our audit procedures, then we can again perform, and it will be it will go hands-on with each step of audit engagement, especially the execution part where we will be performing the risk assessment. The risk assessment is performed before the activity, but during the activity, again, if there is a need for certain change, then we do an amendment and carry out those changes. One of the best way that we or mostly use way is heat map. Heat map is a simple depiction of the risk into three color, red, amber, and green, where green is low, amber is medium, and red is high risk. At the engagement planning level, the first step is to have a preliminary survey just to have a better understanding of the entire process. The second step is to carry out a risk assessment. And the third step is based on that information which you already have gathered now to make the objective of the engagement, that what are the key engagement objective that you want to achieve by the end of your entire assurance engagement or consulting engagement. You will be making an objective for each type of engagements that you are performing. For example, if you have concluded that you will have 6 audit engagements throughout the year, so you will have audit objective for each assignment that you will be carrying out throughout the year. If you are intending to have a consulting assignment, then you will have an objective for the consulting assignment, that what you want to achieve out of your advisory services to the client. In terms of audit engagement objectives, in setting out the engagement objectives, the next steps which follow is to determine the scope of the engagement. Scope is basically the boundaries under which you will be working. It will chart out the entire area out of that huge big process, that to what extent you will be going, to what extent you will be carrying out audit activities. This is there are two dual benefits of having an audit scope. The first thing is it gives you a direction, and it allows you to optimally use your resources, limited resources, on that specific area, and to ensure that you are able to achieve your audit objective. Secondly, it for the reader, for the third person, maybe the audit committee, maybe the management, they know that on which area you have provided your opinion on. For example, if I'm doing an expenses review, so I will be very specific that whether I'm doing a G&A, general and administrative expenses review only, or am I looking for all types of expenses, maybe it direct or indirect expenses, interest expenses, taxation related expenses, depreciation related expenses. So giving a scope area will give the direction to the internal auditor, and also it helps the third person, the audit committee or the management, to better understand that under which boundaries you have carried out your audit activities. The scope of the engagement must include consideration relevance to systems, records, personnel, properties. So to what extent you will be, which are the systems that you will be reviewing in your engagement, what are the records that you will be reviewing, who you will approach for interview for the purpose of the assignment to better understand the systems or the process owner, what are the key asset class that you will be looking at in terms of properties. So that's all encompasses the scope area of an audit engagement. A quick review. So first we did the preliminary review or carry out a survey to understand the process. Then we carry out a risk assessment. Then we determine the audit engagement objectives. Then we concluded the scope, and then we will establish a criteria. Criteria is basically the standard against which we are trying to gauge the performance of a process or an activity. It could be we are reviewing the process against the established company internal policies and procedures, or a regulation, or through any benchmark practices or best practices. So criteria is always a standard against which we are looking at the process to identify any weaknesses or non-compliances or any area of improvement within that process. In practical terms, in organization, whenever you are working as an internal auditor, you will find there are a lot of areas where there are no proper clear-cut criteria, which means that there is no proper policies or procedure or standard against which you benchmark whether the process is in compliance with or have effective controls or not. In that case, the first thing which comes in hand is your personal experience based on multiple audits that you have done. So you evaluate the process based on the best practices. The second is if you can evaluate that and benchmark it with any other company process, or you can take any reference document by which you can look at that how things are being done in the market and how the company is doing, or how things are being done in the sector or in the industry, and then benchmark against it. So if you do not have any internal criteria, you try to get established criteria or a reference criteria from another company or based on your experience. Internal audit resources you deploy based on the scope of the engagement, the objective of the engagement, and the criteria which you want to assess in the system or in the processes. So you look at how many individual auditors you will be needing for that engagement, what are the skill set that will be needing. You might be carrying out cyber security checks, and in that case you might be needing a cyber security specialist, and there could be a possibility that you do not have that internal resources. Then in that case you get an approval from the audit committee at the start of annual audit plan to outsource that activity, or to hire someone, or to get on a project based some individual to perform that audit activity, though the responsibility lies still on you, but you can shed off your lack of competence through outsource activity. So whenever we have an audit engagement, we look for what are the skill sets that are required, and then we assess within the team that who have the required competence, skills, availability, and accordingly we allocate those resources to that particular audit engagement. there is a concept that staff internal audit staff scheduling. So basically, we prepare a document. It is not a requirement that you have to, but generally we do in our annual audit plan that we prepare a document where we chart out the entire audit projects that we have to perform throughout the year, and see what are the resources we have available in-house and what we have the approval of getting in outsourced resources. And then we allocate our resources throughout the year to different audit engagements. What happened that by doing that, there first we give the visibility to the audit committee or to the board and the management that how effectively we are using our resources, and secondly, by planning we are not wasting time of our resources. So if we are not wasting our resources, it means that we are living within the means and we are better optimizing our budget. So this is why it is important that to have a proper resource management, internal audit resource management. If we feel that we need to get a skills for on a permanent basis, then we have to hire a person through the approval channel. But if we need it just for one-off-one assignment, then we can get an outsource. Generally, as a matter of fact, that internal auditor should not accept any assignments where they feel that they do not have the proficiency or competence, proficiency within the team or competence within that individual who will be performing that audit engagement. Then we should not, because we have a duty of due professional care, where we have to give an opinion and our opinion matters, and it might have a consequences if we give a lame kind of opinion on area where we do not have the proper expertise. So this is one thing which we need to take into account. There are two types of procedures that we can perform. One is audit procedures, we will be discussing in the subsequent slide, and one is engagement level procedures, that what are the high level of audit procedures that we can perform. We can review the physical documents, and we can examine all the kind of documents by obtaining, and in order to assess the control environment or the effectiveness of control. We can obtain the information from third party. For example, if we have outsourced IT services, let's say, so we can obtain their information, or if we have any associated program with a third party, let's say corporate social responsibility, so we can obtain that information from a third party as well. Sorry. Client related information we can obtain from our clients. Maybe we have customers, we are service provider, we have clients, we have other engagement partner, for example suppliers, where we take the information and to assess whether that information is in alignment with the company internal processes or not. For example, if we say that we are procuring certain types of raw material from that client, so we can reach out to the client as well to ensure that to provide the data of all the purchases that the company has made, or we can reach out to the customer, or we can reach out to any other authority where we can obtain the information. Original documents, generally internal auditor prefer more than the copies, because copies can easily be altered in terms of contracts, in terms of SLAs. It's also important in terms of purchases, where we look for petty cash purchases or any other big item purchases, that the documents that the company have is original. Then there are certain types of assertions the management made towards in financial statements. The three financial statements that the management have: income statement, balance sheet, cash flow statement. These are the three critical ones. And then we have notes through the financial statement. So there are different assertions that the management made. This is the prime responsibility of the management, that whatever the information they are sharing with their shareholders in the form of financial statements, it is true and fair, and that is being testified by the external auditor. So what are those assertions? The management has to ensure that the transaction which they are reporting in their financial records are complete. It has in existence means that the transaction actually happened, it is complete, the rights and obligation of of that transaction is being transferred, whether it's transferred to us, for example, if we purchase something, or if we sell, it is transferred to the customers. Valuation means that we're the numbers which we are giving, especially in terms of our investments, in terms of our assets, the value of the asset is correctly put it and allocated. There could be more assertions in terms of accuracy of the number, in terms of classification, that whichever expenses or revenue we are booking, it is under proper account heads. So these kind of assumptions that the management which they are responsible to ensure to have a proper controls for it. So we as an internal auditor, we test these assumptions and see whether there is any loophole, or if there is any discrepancies. If there are, we try to recommend the management and to bridge the gap. Internal auditors also use different kind of tools to bring more efficiency and effectiveness to their audit activities. Analytical tools, softwares, compiling the information. So there are different types of tools. It is not mandatory, it depends on company to company. But if you have resources and if there is a huge data that you needed to review and to have a maybe 100% assurance in certain areas, you can use these kind of tools and make part of your audit procedures. There are two things that we look in from the perspective of control. We call it audit procedures applying on the control. The first thing is whether the controls are working effectively, and the second thing is whether the control was deployed throughout the period. So that we determine by substantive testing. Testing of control is simple. For example, if a certain transaction need to be taken in approval, so we just check that whether the approval mechanism happens whenever that transaction is being executed. So we look for that, for example, an initiator will initiate a transaction that should go to the reviewer and approver, and after the approval, then it goes to the next step. But in terms of substantive testing, what we do, we take a sample throughout the year of different months and check all those transactions as being properly approved. So that we ensure that the controls were effectively working throughout the year, or maybe to ensure that whether the controls were there throughout the year or not. The other things which we can follow certain techniques as an auditor in terms of engagement procedures. The main three are observation, interviewing, and examination. This is the three. All the documents which we review, or the interviews which we conduct, or things which we observe, is basically falls under these three categories. Observing means that we see that how people are performing their duty, going to a place, just observing the environment, that health and safety things are there, fire alarms are there. We can carry out an inspection, we can look at the safety measures, we can look at people are following proper protocols or not. So that is an observation. Interviewing is when we want to interact with the other person and to listen to them and to understand from them that what their views is about the control environment, or just to understand the process. Examining, when we want to verify their statement with a physical document or a physical activity, so that we do it through examination. There are certain other techniques that we use. Confirmations are basically if I want to confirm the balances in a account receivable, I will just look at how many, let's say there are 10 customers and there is 1 million of account receivables in the balance sheet. So I want to just confirm the amount, so I will send a confirmation request from these customers, maybe on a sample basis or 100%, and to ask them either to give a positive confirmation or negative confirmation. Positive confirmation is when I send a request, a requisition to these customers and tell them that this is what is the number which is showing in our records against you, that we have to receive that much of amount from you. So whether you agree or disagree, you have to come up to us. So in that case, the number, they say either we agree or we don't agree, our number is less or high, and they give the justification, but they have to respond. Negative confirmation is when I request them only that if you disagree, then tell us. So in that, if they agree, they will stay quiet. We reach out for negative confirmation for minor amounts where we want to just have to confirm, and positive confirmation where the amount is material and significant. Tracing and vouching is a concept, which means that we take the tracing is when we start the process from the very beginning and trace each activity till the end of the process and see all the documents are being published, or all the activities or review approval process has done as per the required standard within the company. Vouching is when we take the final product. For example, if I so that an item is being procured, so I will just choose and pick which item is being procured, and then we'll look at was there a proper agreement behind that, was there a purchase order behind that, have the payments are made or not. So I will go in a opposite direction or in an opposite way to reach out to the first source document of that activity initiate from final to backward. So another example would be that I look at the inventory item in the computer list and verify through physical inspection. That will be tracing. The other would be vouching, where I look for a specific item within the floor and then go backward toward the listing. So that would be, it's a very lame example, but just to give you an understanding that how the forward and backward thing happen. Reperformance is when you re-perform the management activity just to ensure whether the numbers are coming accurately by the system or not. One of the example I will share from my practical experience, that one time we perform a fixed asset depreciation calculation. We reperformed and we concluded that the management which they have provided, the depreciation number is undervalued, or it is less. We went to the management with our observation, and later on we discovered that the system has an issue. The formula which was incorrectly put it in the system, and as a result the depreciation calculation was wrongly being performed over the years. So the management took the corrective action and they adjusted the assets. But this is how we reperform the activity. Analytical review, when we look for different kind of ratio analysis just to ensure that if there is any abnormal ratio, then we should more investigate in that area. And scanning is again where we look at and observe the environment and see if there is something abnormal, then we focus on that specific area. So these are certain other types of audit procedures that internal auditor mainly use in their audit engagements. Whenever an internal auditor is carrying out an audit activity and looking at any process, they can benchmark that process or that activity against a model. We call it capability maturity model. It has two versions. The first version was CMM, capability maturity model, and then there was a revised version which is capability maturity model integration development 2. So there is model 1 and model 2. You can just consider as a version 1 and version 2, where we use this tool as a model to assess the maturity of a process. Let's say if you want to look at the company hiring process, So you will look at whether it falls from level 1 to 5. If the highest maturity of a process would be 5, then where does our current process falls? Is it falls at 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4? 0 is generally where we have not established a proper process for an activity. It could be, let's say, any activity within the company. It could be a very minor activity, for example, issuing employee IDs. So some employees have the IDs, some employees doesn't have an ID, so there is no proper systematic activity in issuing the employee ID. So that could be considered at the level 0, where we did not have established the process in itself. Then level 1 is where we have defined the process, that this is a process where this is where the employees IDs will be issued through this process. When we use a systematic step-by-step procedure for issuing employee ID, where they have to come on that particular day, they have to have a picture, they need to apply through filling a form or something, and there is a timeline against which they have to comply. So if that is there, then we say that the process is established and it falls in level 2. Level 3 is where we set the KPIs for that process, that there shouldn't be a delay in the process, there should be a minimum requirement in the process that everyone has to fulfill. So when we set a criteria for that particular process in order to KPIs, then we call it level 3. Level 4 is where we evaluate the performance of that area against those KPIs, and level 5 is where all the process is established. Now we have a KPIs, now we are monitoring, but then there is a need for a continuous improvement, that we look at our environment, we look at our competitors and see how we can further optimize our process, how we can further accelerate our process. Maybe it's a manual process, we need to make it automated. If it is automated, we might need to reduce the input from the employee, and we can use the documents which they provide and as an input and take it from there, and we can issue the ID. So this is these are the steps that we can apply generically to any kind of a process and see to what level that process falls in, and accordingly we can apply our audit procedures, because if it is more mature, then there will be more controls, strong controls. If it is less mature, then there will be more informal controls, but not formal controls. So we have to test accordingly. The least mature in area is, then there is more room for having more anomalies, discrepancies, issues, fraud. But the more mature it is, there will be less, and accordingly we have to set our sampling standards and audit procedures that we have to perform. Overall, the entire based on the entire previous discussion, where we discuss about to carry out a preliminary survey, then we can carry out a risk assessment, then we can have the objective of the engagements, determine the scope of the engagement, then allocate the resources of the engagement, and where this all information will go. This all information will be reflected in the work programs, engagement work programs. The IIS says that we need to have a documented work program where we have an activity level, risk controls, the procedures that we will be performing, and it has to be documented, because the document give us the assurance that the internal auditor has systematically performed the audit procedures and they have covered this much of the area of the scope, and it's easy for the quality assurance purpose as well. And also documentation allow, if there are multiple auditors working on the same engagement, that who is responsible for what and to what extent the work has been done, so from where the other auditor has to pick the work. These audit work programs needs to be approved by the line manager or engagement lead or supervisor. We can have a standard work program for areas which are more typical in nature, repetitive in work, where we do not see too much of deviation or doesn't require too much of a change. So we can just to have more efficiency in our audit and not to miss out on any critical area, we can have a standard audit work program and more like a checklist, and then we can look for we can apply the audit procedure just to give an assurance on that area. A typical work program will include following things: scope of the engagement, objective of the engagement, risk and controls, sample size, that what are the samples that we are taking, even the audit procedures that we are performing, whether we are uh, whether we will observe the environment or the physical existence, or we will be looking at examining the document, or we will be interviewing the people. So this is all the audit procedures will be documented there. Yeah, that how and what we will be performing, and what is the sample size, to what extent we will perform our audit procedures, the resources allocated, and what are the key anomalies, then whatever the exceptions that comes out of the audit procedures, that is become part of our audit findings, which are listed there, and then from there it goes back to the audit report. So this is okay. One more important thing, audit program is also called sometime working papers. Some people call it. Some people call it. There are some other names for audit program, work program, working papers. So this is all the name for the same thing. So you just have to understand that the working papers which we have as an internal auditor at the time of executions, that is basically our work program, and we need to have a comprehensive one document which can have supplementary more attachments, but overall one summary where a third person can review and understand that what was the objective, how we achieve, how what procedures we deploy, and how we able to achieve the objective. Here is just a quick summary for you, just to understand that how the sequence follows. In the previous unit, in our previous video, we have talked in detail about the annual audit plan, in which we talk about that the internal auditor needs to have an audit universe. Then they have to identify the risk under the risk universe, associate those risks with the audit universe areas, prioritize, assess and prioritize those risks based on the importance, and then um, see which are the most important and make it part of our annual audit plan. And that plan needs to be shared with management to take their input, and shared with the audit committee to get an approval. Once that audit plan is done, we know that what are the audit engagements that we are performing. Then under each audit engagement, then again we will perform a preliminary survey or preliminary audit procedures to develop our understanding of the key risk of that engagement, and then we perform a risk assessment at the engagement level to prioritize the risk and the areas which we will be testing. Then based on that, we establish our engagement objectives, we determine our scope, and we establish our criteria against which we will be reviewing that area. We allocate our resources accordingly. We look for staff scheduling, and then based on the audit procedures, we assess the process maturity of that area, and finally we document everything in our audit work program. And from the audit work program, all the discrepancies, errors, mistakes, non-compliances, fraudulent, if we found fraudulent instances, this all become part of our audit findings. After discussing with the management, we draft in the draft audit report, obtain their comments, and then finally issue the final audit report. So this is the whole cycle, stepwise, how we perform our audit engagement and work program, how we develop our work program. The letter, there are certain more in detail discussion which on these areas, for example information gathering and communication and reporting, in the subsequent units, which we will be discussing when we are having those discussion in the video. This is the end of our today's presentation. I hope you have gained some knowledge and now have a much better and clear understanding of the entire process of audit execution. And please do like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comment section. And hope to see you in the next video.